So one of the awesome things about having this channel and this platform is that so many golfers reach out to us and share videos of them swinging the golf club and looking for help and looking for advice. And one of the things that's always a little bit funny to me is how many people send me videos and ask me about very, very obscure kind of things when their posture is really poor. And one of the biggest pet peeves that I have when it comes to swing vids is like, I don't care what it looks like at the top, because if we don't set up in a dynamic posture, not only are we not going to be able to use and sequence our body correctly, but we're also going to be losing all of our ability to create torque, use the ground, and create power. So what we're going to look at in this video is how you can build a dynamic posture and what are some of the do's and don'ts that get in the way and could cause you to lose some speed. So when we say dynamic posture, what do we mean by that? Well, the word dynamic sounds pretty much like it is. We need to be dynamic. We need to create movement. We need to create action. So one of the biggest things that I see with a lot of golfers is that when we look at their posture and we start from the ground up and look at their lower legs or even from the hips down, we tend to see a lot of alignments that are going to cause issues for them when it comes to movement throughout the golf swing. So when we look down the line, as we can see here, when I'm standing with my lower leg, so from my kneecap up into my ankle, when I'm standing with that angle more vertical this way, it tends to cause the pressure across my feet to even out from front to back. So anterior, posterior, to use the fancy words this way, it tends to cause the pressure to even out the more vertically aligned my fib and tib are in my lower leg. So the reason that we don't love having the pressure equally on the front and the back of the foot is that now it becomes much easier for me to want to rotate from the hip level. And that really is going to cause a lot of problems in the golf swing, because the more we rotate from the hip level, the more you can see I start pushing my pelvis back towards the target. And now it looks like I've made a lot of depth and made a big turn, but in reality, there's no pressure on my right foot. So we don't want to have this right hip moving back this way, the same way we don't want to slide it that way. So what we're trying to do here with the legs is we're trying to create a starting position to where it's going to keep me from wanting to open that hip early. So how do we do that? We just add a little flex to the knees and we get the fib and tib leaned more towards the target, and we're really going to feel like our knees are more over our toes. That's really what we're shooting for here, is we want to feel like we're going to be able to grab a weight and we're going to be able to pull that up away from the ground. But I wouldn't do that with my legs vertical and my butt back like this. I would do it more over the bar, pulling from the ground, as we can see from down the line. And that's going to allow me to not only get the pressure more onto the balls of my feet, but that's also going to, believe it or not, take my hips and turn them slightly inward, which is going to create a little bit of IR, or internal rotation, which is going to do a lot of good to help me kill some of that excessive slide back and forth. But more importantly, now it's going to make me want to feel like I move more up in the backswing with the hip instead of moving it back and down, which is only going to cause a lot of issues when it comes to loading later on in the sequence. So as we talked about with the lower leg assembly, getting the knees more stacked up over the balls of the feet, or where the toes are, is always going to be in your best interest, because like we said, it's going to create a little bit of IR, or internal rotation, where your hips turn in a little bit, which is going to be really, really helpful for us when we go to load into the backswing. So what we're going to talk about next is we're going to talk about how we've got our legs into this nice position and we can feel a lot of load here in the upper legs. We want to feel like we're getting ready to kind of jump. We're not going to jump, but we want to feel like we're able to jump a little bit. So we're going to feel above the kneecaps load a little bit. And now we're going to talk about this pelvis, because this is really, really important. And this is where I see a lot of golfers having the sore back blues. This is where a lot of us are getting sore. It's where we can't create any turn, and it's where we're really losing some speed. So we're going to talk about how this pelvis kind of moves throughout the swing and what we need to do at setup to make sure we're set up for a position of success. So the big thing with the pelvis is that it naturally sits a little bit inclined forward. So I think the average is about 7 degrees, But if you're just standing up nice and tall like a normal human being, we're gonna see that the pelvis is tipped forward about 7 degrees this way. So that's all we're saying, that naturally sits that way, even when you're standing tall. And the reason that is the same reason you have a curve in your spine. So the pelvis sits a little forward, the curve in your spine kind of helps you stand up, and that allows us to be able to extend up through the anatomy. So we know that the pelvis is starting tipped forward, and what we do when we get into our golf posture, from down the line, and this is my biggest pet peeve, is I see a lot of people really getting those glutes back, pushing the butt way back from the ball and really extending their lower lumbar. So not only are they starting tipped forward, but then they're tilting even more through their pelvis this way. So the issue is now I can't really turn my upper body because my lower back is locked out. The facet joints in my lower back are at end range of motion, and they're not going to allow me to go any farther. So when I get to this end range of motion or locked position, and I move a little bit the wrong way, that's how we end up hurting our back when we're tying our shoes and things like that, because we don't have the room to move safely with the lower back, the lumbar, or the spine, however you choose to look at that. So here's what we do. We know when we get set up with our knees over our toes, okay, on the balls of our feet, that good lower body dynamic position, we know that our pelvis is tipped a little bit forward. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna pretend we grab our belt buckle and we're gonna pull it all the way up to our face. We're gonna pretend we're Steve Urkel, just pulling that belt all the way up to our face, okay? So now that we're here, we can see down the line that my glutes are way more over top of my feet, and we can't see, but my butt is squeezed pretty tight. So what I'm actually doing is I'm kind of taking my center of mass and I'm kind of tucking it in and making sure that I've got a lot of squeeze around it so that I'm able to hold that in place. So we want to feel like we take the pelvis and we establish that pelvis. That's super, super important here. We want to get our wine glasses, if our hips were wine glasses, we don't want to spill the wine forward. We want to pull the glasses back and make sure we're able to carry those glasses across a white carpet without spilling anything. So establishing this pelvis is super, super important when it comes to creating a dynamic and foundation that we can work from with the upper body. So in an effort to create a dynamic base to work off of, we've talked about how we want to create the knees over the toes with the pressure into the balls of the feet. We've talked about how we want to establish the pelvis and feel like the glutes are really squeezing and holding that center of mass in place. And now what we're going to talk about next is we're going to talk about the trunk or our upper body. So if you think about your upper body, it's really two cavities, and the cavity on the bottom is going to be our abdomen. The cavity on the top is going to be our thoracic. And then we actually have our diaphragm that separates those two cavities. So it's kind of like a balloon up here, to where if I apply more kind of squeeze at the top, the bottom gets bigger and the bigger gets bottom as this gets smaller. So we're constantly kind of shifting things around in this upper cavity. So long story short, when we think of it as a thoracic and an abdomen, this really helps us kind of understand how we build this dynamic posture. So this is going to be super helpful for my friends out there that have the sore back after hitting some drivers at the range. And it's also going to be super helpful for my people who can't seem to get their left leg to stay on the ground to save their life. So what we're talking about here with this upper body is we're going to get the knees over the toes. Once again, feeling like I can pull the weight away from the ground, so I'm feeling really dynamic. I feel loaded up here in the upper leg. I'm going to take my belt now and I'm going to establish my pelvis, and that really makes me feel like I can track some of my core. And that's where we start getting into the trunk, is this core or abdomen area here. And when we establish that pelvis floor, I'm really able to activate not only my abs, but also my glutes. So now I'm squeezing from both sides of the equation. So what I want to do is I want to feel like my pelvis being established and pulled up full Urkel allows me to kind of establish the edge. And now I can safely look over the edge of the building with my upper body and get my thoracic in front of my abdomen. And that's massively important here. We want to get the thoracic in front of the abdomen. And when we look from down the line, what we can see is that my lower back, is much more neutral. I'm not this way with my back extended, and now I just only can sway and rock. Now it's much easier for me to create a twist and a torque with my back neutral. So this is super helpful in getting our body into the correct position. So once again, we want to feel, not that we get leaning back this way. So in this position here, okay, I've got knees over toes. Okay, I feel it in my upper legs. I got my butt squeezed, I got my pelvis established, but now my arms don't want to hang. So now I feel like I got to do all kinds of stuff like collapse. So where we want to be with this is we want to feel like we get, once again, the thoracic over top of the abdomen. And it's almost like we feel like we're doing a standing crunch. And once we have that crunch established, now we've got somewhere for the arms to hang. And it's critically important when we're looking at video from down the line, especially with like a mid-iron, we don't want to see the hands way out here. We don't want to see the hands way in here. We want to see that the hands are more or less hanging underneath the shoulder joints. So knees over toes, really establishing that load in the legs, pelvis established, thoracic in front of abdomen. I feel a ton of abs here. And now we can see that my hands are hanging much more underneath my shoulder joints. And now I'm able to get this club in a much better position to set up than previously before. So making sure that we're creating this kind of loading or these action forces and getting prepared to move and getting everything set is going to be super critical for making sure that we set the stage for good movement later on. So if you're one of the countless swing videos that gets sent to me, make sure that you're checking that posture before you send me that video, because as I said, getting this butt way back here is really only going to lead to a lot of issues in our golf swing. So make sure you don't look like you're a Pac-Man when you're setting up to the golf ball, and make sure we feel like we're doing that standing crunch and really getting those muscles activated, because we want to make speed, but we want to make speed in a healthy and safe way. And by getting everything kind of tightened up around the center of mass, now all of a sudden it's going to be much easier for us to create those forces and torques without creating a lot of translations, which is a fancy way of saying it's much easier to do a triple axel if you're a figure skater with everything close to you than it is to do that triple axel with everything kind of shooting out like an orangutan falling out of a tree. So we want to make sure we're keeping everything tight and keeping everything moving within these parameters that we set up with that dynamic posture. So if you have any questions about that at all, make sure to reach out to us in the comment section. We're always happy to kind of get in there and answer the simple questions that we can handle through a couple comments. So once again, thanks for tuning in. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button. So until next time, keep grinding.